In a, for some reason, stunning turn of events, the opening day of the annual meeting of the Catholic bishops in Baltimore began with disappointment. I say for some reason because it remains a mystery why any of the lay faithful, first and foremost myself, keep expecting anything positive to come from a body as useless as the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and it remains a mystery. The mysterious nature of our faith and our leaders is in what has come to be known as Francis Church, was put on stark display on Monday when the president of the USCCB, Cardinal DiNardo, made this announcement that you by now have heard of at least secondhand.
Dear brothers, I need to open our time together with an important announcement. At the insistence of the Holy See, we will not be voting on the two action items in our documentation regarding the abuse crisis, that is, the standards of accountability for bishops and the special commission for receiving complaints against bishops. The Holy See has asked that we delay voting on these so that our deliberations can inform and be informed by the global meeting of the conference presidents that the Holy Father has called for February 2019. I'm sorry for the late notice, but in fact, this was conveyed to me late yesterday afternoon. Although I am disappointed that we will not be taking these actions tomorrow in terms of vote, I remain hopeful that this additional consultation will ultimately improve our response to the crisis we face.
The look on his face says it all. Now, according to Cardinal DiNardo, the order came from not Pope Francis, but from the Congregation for Bishops. It's worth noting here who the Congregation for the Bishops are, at least the American representatives. Blaise Cupich, friend of this channel, and Donald Wuerl, friend of Uncle Teddy McCarrick. It's also worth noting that the Congregation for the Bishops is overseen by Cardinal Ouellet, who wouldn't comment on Archbishop Vigano's testimony without papal approval. Remember that, because it's going to be important here in a moment. So Cardinal Ouellet is denying that the Pope gave the order, but to be clear, Cardinal Ouellet would not act publicly in any major way without Pope Francis's approval. Curious. Cupich had a statement ready to be read, and it's weird given the announcement. Keep in mind that Cupich is part of the Congregation for the Bishops, that same body headed by Ouellet, who wouldn't do a thing without Pope Francis's approval. Here is Cupich's statement directly. Comments of Cardinal Blaise J. Cupich, Archbishop of Chicago, on the proposals to be considered at the USCCB meeting, dated yesterday, November 12th, 2018. Today, the president of our conference, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, informed the body of bishops that the Holy See has decided that, while we should proceed with discussing our proposals related to child protection, we should postpone our final vote on them until after the February meeting of the Episcopal Conferences in Rome, so that our decisions can be informed by listening to our brother bishops from around the world. In response, I urge that the body of bishops take up the discussion as scheduled, fine-tune the documents, and then take a resolution ballot to make clear to our people where we stand, but also to give the president of our conference a clear indication of the mind of the bishops in the United States as he prepares to participate in the February meeting. I also noted that it is clear that the Holy See recognizes the urgency of this issue and is placing great importance on the February meeting, understanding that the present crisis is not limited to one or a few countries, but that it is a watershed moment for the Universal Church. Finally, I urge that we should meet again in March to take up our proposals, informed by the input of other bishops' conferences and the results of the February meeting, and then take a final vote as an action item. I realize that another meeting will create logistical challenges for the conference staff and the bishops' schedules, but there is a grave urgency to this matter, and we cannot delay. What a hero Cardinal Cupich is, and what such quick thinking, unless, of course, he knew. A full link to that text is in the description. Have fun reading it. Of course, this should surprise no one, yet we all remain surprised when this stuff happens. I say it should surprise no one because we have this report from the 28th of September of this year from 1 Peter 5. Headline, German paper exposes Coco Palmero, Francis 86ing Bishop Abuse Tribunal by Marco Tosati. Again, this is from September 28th, 2018. After the important investigation of Der Spiegel on the Pope entitled Thou Shalt Not Bear False Witness, now another German daily, Herr der Korrespondenz, which certainly not even the most frenzied Bergoglianist could condemn as conservative is examining the authority of the Church, its questionable characters, and its ambiguities. Benjamin Levin, a well-known German theologian and editor, explains in an essay that, according to his Vatican sources, it was Cardinal Francis Coco Palmero, one of the closest counselors of Pope Bergoglio, who promoted an attitude of indulgence at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith toward priests who were responsible for sexual abuse. Thanks to the English translation of Mike Hickson, we are able to offer this report to our readers and to you, my faithful subscribers, which is definitely of interest, given both a source and the means of communication. According to several sources, Cardinal Cocoa Puffs interceded with the Pope in favor of Don Mauro Enzoli, the priest of CL, Communion and Liberation, who had been condemned for sexual abuse but then was reinstated in his priestly ministry. Cocoa Puffs was president of the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts until April 2018. In 2010, he was named as a member for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, the CDF. In 2015, Pope Francis named him as a member of the new arm of the CDF that was commissioned to examine the appeals of priests accused of abuse. According to the testimony of Archbishop Vigano, Cocoa Puffs is part of the pro-gay current in the Vatican. The author of the essay and Herder Correspondence, Benjamin Levin, lives in Rome and has close contacts in the Vatican. His essay entitled Francis and Abuse, The Papal Secret, discusses the problems of abuse and the role of the Pope. Levin writes about the drug-fueled homosexual party that took place in the apartment of the palace of the CDF occupied by Monsignor Luigi Capozzi, Cocoa Puff's secretary. Levin confirms the story that Capozzi obtained this apartment, which was destined for another person, thanks to the personal intervention of the Pope. Levin adds that the warnings which had been given were ignored by the Pope since the elevation of Capozzi to the role of bishop was being planned. Levin recalls that Cocoa Puffs generally spoke against using laicization as a punishment for a priest, because such a priest would be treated equivalently to someone condemned to death. That's interesting. This is a position the Cardinal consistently maintained, and in fact, writes Levin, he regularly proposed light penalties to the CDF for abusers. With this affirmation, Levin reveals that it may well have been Cocoa Puffs who opposed Cardinal Mueller's hard line against sexual abuse, when the former CDF prefect revealed that there were persons close to the Pope who thought Mueller had a lack of mercy in dealing with those responsible for abuse. Only 20% of those found guilty were laicized, but even this was too much for some of those holding influence with the Pope. Levin relates how, through the personal intervention of the Pope, several priests who were working in the disciplinary section responsible for handling cases of abuse were dismissed from the CDF. These positions still have not been filled, and in passing we recall that these arbitrary dismissals, which Mueller protested, gave the Pope the occasion to publicly tell a lie in front of journalists. He, one of the dismissed officials, did a great job, but he was a little tired and he went back to his homeland to do the same work for his bishops, according to the Pope. You can read the rest of that on 1 Peter 5. A link is on the Sources blog. So we received warnings about this a full 6 weeks before the planned non-synod Synod of Bishops in Baltimore. Yet, for confirmation, the words of Monsignor Charles Pope will remove all doubt. This is from an EWTN broadcast from about a week ago.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, restoring credibility, I think now, we've talked about, we have to be very clear, I think, that this is about homosexuality, a big culture of that in the priesthood. It's also about just not preaching and teaching, moral teachings of the church, not insisting upon them, allowing for dissent to go unchecked. So I think, again, it comes back to teaching, governing, and sanctifying.
You have voices in the church. Some of the bishops at this meeting saying, no, look at the data. Homosexuality is in no way involved here. Yeah. This is child predation. This is pedophilia. Yeah. But the data suggests something very different, actually. Yeah. I've been covering this for 20 years. Yeah. There is a different thing here. Why the inability to acknowledge what is so apparent in the data, in the John Jay report, in the statistical data we've seen?
There is a climate of fear. And, of course, it's created, I think, by our culture that you can't say anything that's even in any way negative or untoward towards those with same-sex attraction. And I think that, again, we have to say we're all prone to sin. And we have to get over that fear, and we have to speak very clearly that the conditions here are very clearly, it strains credibility to say this has nothing to do with homosexuality in the priesthood. It does. And it's very clearly backed up statistically. Father Paul Sullins has just issued a very good report with the Ruth Institute that also backs it up, a fine sociological analysis of the data. And I beg our bishops to look carefully at that, to be very careful about the seminary and who we admit, and to be very clear about the nature of the problem. But not just this, but all sins across the board. We've got to get back in the business of calling sin by its name.
What should the bishops do? If you were advising them, what are the top 2 things you think they need to do to address the sex abuse crisis that you no doubt hear from your people in the pew? It is very disturbing and disheartening to the people in the pew.
We have to speak very clearly, all of us clergy, but especially the bishops, have to get back in the business of teaching about sexual morality. We don't want to offend. We don't want to upset anybody. Well, we have to be willing. Jesus offended a few people. He didn't end up on a cross by just, saying nice platitudes. We have to get back in the business of speaking clearly and teaching clearly, and then also we have to discipline in the church. Whatever happened to sanctions? Nobody seems to ever be sanctioned. I won't mention his name, but there's a renegade priest who runs around talking about the LGBTQIA agenda with no reference to repentance. There's no discipline. Nobody reins him in.
Later in that same interview, Monsignor Pope and Raymond Arroyo admit that the solution to this can only come from Rome. Real reform can only come from Rome, but we've already established that Pope Francis has no intention of addressing the Bay Area lifestyle problem in the church today. After all, he promoted Cardinal Cocoa Puffs and secured him and his special offices to do his gay sex orgies. And the lack of action from Rome is beyond a tragedy. Something must be done, and it begins with you. You and I, we need to pray, fast, and offer our sufferings for the liberation and exaltation of the church. So please, as much as you might blanch at this, pray for Francis, pray for the priests, and pray for bishops, and pray for all the members of the laity who are losing their faith over this. If you like videos like this, like and share this video and subscribe, and click that notification bell below. You can support my work if you are so inclined through Patreon. A link is found in the description below, along with links to my Twitter, the blog, and the Facebook page I manage. For Return to Tradition, I am Anthony Stein. Ave Maria.